Content warning. Viewer discretion advised.
Update everyone, this is Josine, at the helm to analyze thine idiocy. This video should be relatively short compared to the other projects I definitely have not been slacking on, so let's not delay and introduce today's target. So on January 18th, a political commentator named Ephrom Josine wrote an aptly titled article about the resurging Twitter discourse of Hogwarts Legacy. The article sums up more of the context, so I'll leave it at that for now, though I do want to mention that he deleted it on February 8th? 9th? Somewhere in that time frame? It's reasonable to assume Ephrom has disowned the article, so I do not want anyone to get on his case over an essay that no longer exists. That's what I'm here for. Seriously though, don't harass the guy. I'm still going through with this commentary because I don't know to what extent Ephrom has disowned his article, so I'd like to cover all the bases I could find. Making this video was still fun for me, and it can still serve to inform my audience too. And to be honest, I want to make some content that won't involve cleaning at least a year's worth of dust off of it. Gotta break the radio silence on this channel somehow. Anyway, let's cut to the chase and cut through some words.
My only article on Hogwarts Legacy. For the past several months, a controversy has been taking place regarding if transgender allies should buy the game Hogwarts Legacy, a video game coming out later this year based on the Harry Potter series, which was created by the famously transphobic J.K. Rowling. Many supporters of transgender rights have gone so far as to advocate for a full boycott of the game in protest of Rowling's transphobia. Personally, I am a firm transgender ally. I have never been a fan of the Harry Potter series, and I would have no plans of buying the game even if it wasn't for Rowling's transphobia. I am also a firm defender of the right of people to boycott products because of the political views of the creator. Just check my writing on the Scott Cawthon controversy from 2021 if you want evidence of that. However, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a tad annoyed with the implication many transgender allies have created that those who purchase the game are simply indifferent to Rowling's transphobia. To give just one example, here's a tweet from Nezziemonster yesterday regarding people who still purchase the game. Play that game. Watch that show. Do whatever the hell you want. You don't get to whine though when people understandably do not want to be around you because of that. You clearly value entertainment over people anyway, so why the fuck do you care? I have to ask, why is the only option that people who buy the game value entertainment over people?
Well, put simply, it's because buying Hogwarts Legacy would give financial support to an active transphobe. If you didn't value entertainment over people, buying Hogleg would not be a concern in the first place because there are so many other games you could prioritize over this one. Games that are not produced by a publicly self-righteous turf who will interpret any sales as prey validation.
Why can't it be the case that they're cynical of the effectiveness of boycotts, especially against somebody who has a net worth of over $1 billion?
Oh, that can still be the case, but that is a reason, not an excuse. Buying the game is still giving Joanne money, still making the boycott more difficult to achieve, and still looks bad for you in front of the boycotters you previously aligned yourself with. Fun little fact for you. That tweet from Nezziemonster was merely the last third of a Twitter thread that starts as follows.
I don't know why people are like,
I'm Zoe, but I love Harry Potter and need to play it.
go do it. Just don't sit there and also pretend you give a shit about us. You really don't need to announce it, and I don't understand why you even did.
Remember when Ephrom asked why valuing entertainment over people was the only interpretation? Yeah, that wouldn't be the case if a certain member of House Slytherin didn't isolate context for the sake of a point. Generally speaking, buying a Hogleg could have more nuance behind it that wouldn't label yourself as a transphobe out the gate, but in this specific context, with this specific individual Nezzie is referring to, the pool of options has thinned down to only one possible outcome. It doesn't matter how much money Rowling has or how effective the boycott may be, at least not in terms of this thread. Let's bring up that second third, just so we have the whole context.
I get separating art from the artist, but when said artist takes sales as validation for her takes, you have to cross a line in the sand somewhere. Do what you want, but your friends have a right to not feel safe around you for your choices.
My, if it isn't the consequences of my actions. What a hubris, Josine.
For that matter, why can't it be the case that, although they don't want to support Rowling, they do want to support other people who worked on the game? For example, what if somebody who is a massive fan of the works of Avalanche Software buys the game for that reason?
Geez, these questions are almost too easy for an article like this. By merely delving into my
vast universal intellect,
aka I looked it up on Google, it turns out most game devs don't get money from sales. They get paid in advance thanks to their publishers. In this case, that would be Warner Bros. Interactive. For a company as ginormous as Warner Bros., it's likely they can still make another game that Rowling won't reach royalties from. God damn it. It's likely they can still make another game that Rowling won't leech royalties from. Ugh, say that 5 times fast. And on the slim chance Avalanche does rely more on game sales than I surmised, then you could just buy their other video games? I mean, these devs have more to their lineup besides Har Har's Bazaar, Little Witch, Goblin Slayer, Academia, though frankly I question if massive fans of Avalanche truly exist. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are some out there somewhere, but Avalanche has mostly made licensed games, so it's likely anyone buying these games did so because they were related to someone's favorite movie or TV show, and not for the devs themselves. And this is just personally speaking, but most of these games are kinda mid. And this is coming from the guy who plays Witch and Hero 2 in his sleep. My life is mid!
What if somebody is buying the game on the basis of it being an action RPG, a genre that has been highly neglected by modern video game developers?
My good sir, hast thou seen Elden Ring? Or what about Monster Hunter, or Dark Souls, Kingdom Hearts 3, The Outer Wilds, Fallout, Genshin Impact, Witch and Hero— Wait, that's not an RPG? Frickin' Hades? I understand wanting a new action RPG to play, but it doesn't sound very big brain of you to say the genre has been neglected, while still neglecting the action RPGs that are already available. While we haven't seen a new installment for the genre in— hang on. Almost a year? Seriously? Games like Genshin, Warframe, and Monster Hunter Rise have gotten major updates over the years to stay fresh. Not to mention anyone interested in action RPGs would already benefit from looking for other games in the genre to buy other than he who must not be pre-ordered.
That's not even getting into the various ways people could play the game without supporting rolling. Would buying the game used also count as valuing entertainment over people? How about pirating the game, meaning nobody profits from the game one way or the other?
On paper, these queries sound easy to say yes to, but at the same time, both solutions are not without their failings. For starters, the pirate life is not alright with everyone. Not only is obtaining this buried treasure rather dodgy, especially for those unfamiliar with those waters, but before you can even think of digging, you gotta remember the treasure has to be buried in the first place. What I mean is it usually takes a long while for a ROM to be released to the public, and will likely be found among some super sketchy links and websites you do not want to risk entering. Besides, piracy is still illegal, and newer games tend to be swarming with cybersecurity and whatnot to prevent pirated copies from being leaked, assuming they get made at all. So that means the simpler alternative would be to buy a used copy, right? Well, that waiting game applies here too, since, as of scripting, the game is still in pre-order, and digital downloads means the possibility of stray physical copies are almost cut in half. But regardless of all that, it would still mean someone bought the game. You just had to go through someone else to obtain it. Someone who either didn't know about J.K. Rowling's background or didn't care. And wasn't the whole point of the boycott to spread that awareness? To try and influence some change by refusing to give Rowling more money? At the article's release, we're not even in a situation where your alternative methods were possible yet. In recent months, people on Twitter were announcing that they would buy the game or already pre-ordered Hogleg. We can't exactly dance around the recent past with hypotheticals of the future here, when those pre-orders have still been processed.
I'm sure Nezziemonster would have a response to every hypothetical I just brought up. And obviously I'm not expecting her to respond to all of them in a tweet, but this does show my issue with the simplistic narrative.
Yeah, here's a question I've been sitting on for a while. Why is Nezziemonster your only example here? You've cited other sources before in the 2 articles you plugged into this one via the underlined text, so I highly doubt the same couldn't be done here. If you took such an issue with this simplistic narrative, why couldn't you quote other people on Twitter who spoke on the matter? It would open the idea of a more complex narrative if you're looking for one, and more concrete evidence of the general narrative being simple if you couldn't find more thought-provoking threads. But the article doesn't give either of those. Instead, we got an elaborate subtweet with extra steps that tunnel visions on one person as its scapegoat. Heck, why stop at Twitter? You posted this article on Medium.com for crap's sake! You're not just limiting your pool of research, you're limiting the scope of your audience, which is arguably just as bad because of how under the radar it's flying. Like, I only knew about this article because a friend stumbled upon it in a Discord server somewhere. I never even heard of Medium beforehand, and when compared to Ephrom's Twitter, it looks like only a third of his followers kept tabs on his Medium page. By the way, nice. And barring a link in Ephrom's bio, he hasn't advertised his junior journalism very publicly, so I can only assume he either forgot to advertise his latest addition to Medium, or he didn't want to. I'll stuff this into my bag of holding for now. It should come in handy for my final thoughts. Until then, goodness to glazed, forget subtweeting. He made a twitlonger without the twitlonger.
To be fair, Nezzie did include one other reason for their stance in the previous tweet from the thread I just quoted from. I get separating art from the artist, but when said artist takes sales as validation for her takes, you have to cross a line in the sand somewhere. Do what you want, but your friends have a right to not feel safe around you for your choices. My issue with this line of reasoning is simple. Rowling will take anything that happens to the game as validation. If the game sells badly, then she'll say that she's been cancelled by the woke mob or whatever because she's fundamentally a delusional person who has both the entire media and the mainstream cultural narrative on her side.
Excuse me? This has nothing to do with Nezzie's thread. What are you on about? They never mentioned what Rowling might think of the boycott. This was strictly about our anonymous consumer and how their friends don't feel safe around this one guy. But fine, for the sake of the argument, let's set the Bluebird app aside for a moment and dip into my favorite topic, cancel culture. Yeah. Now then. How do you know this is how Rowling would respond? Ephrom doesn't show any proof that she's delusional enough to see any reaction to her work as validation, and even if that were the case, it makes almost no sense practically. Had Rowling mentioned her hate base to appear as the victim, that would also raise the question of why she became so infamous, and thus drawing more awareness to her blatant transphobia and anti-Semitism. With every person who would sympathize with this hypothetical plight, there's gonna be another who doesn't buy her bullshit and her products by proxy. It's self-defeating and would only serve to get her cancelled faster. And disregarding all that, it doesn't matter how JK reacts, at least not in the way you're thinking. The boycott was done to protest against Rowling, yes, but it's done in a public forum so that more people are made aware of this stubborn TERF and hold her responsible for her actions. With the right numbers, she'd have no choice but to listen, and there are visible signs that she's been on the decline. Her book sales fell off in recent years, with the deepest trench I've found dipping 40% on her digital publisher Pottermore. Her book Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone was dropped from the Queen's Jubilee, a list made to feature authors and literature from the past 7 decades, all while Rowling kept digging a deeper hole for herself on Twitter. By now you're probably seeing a pattern. Although Ephrom may take issue with the simplistic narrative and go, consider the following, to argue for more nuance, his inquiries ironically lack such complexity. So much so that adding said nuance would cut his own arguments down or give more reason as to why the boycott should keep going. All while this firm transgender ally plays devil's advocate towards second-handedly giving money to a TERF, when there are other alternative methods that could paint you in a much less negative light. Just off the top of my head, you could donate to support groups made for trans rights, or forming an industry union at Avalanche Software should you want to support the devs and not Rowling. Though with recent news, it doesn't really seem like they need that. Another way of looking at it with a more gray area is to donate to these groups at least the same amount of cash you bought Hogleg for, so that the two cancel out, or ratioed to the support group's benefit. It's pretty expensive and still morally gray to finance both sides at the same time, but there's at least some compromise being made here instead of belittling the boycotters. And those ideas I just stole from the same Twitter drama. I just had to look it up for 2 minutes instead of defaulting to the single thread you've shown us. Hell, when Hogleg came out, I noticed a dozen or so Twitch streamers play the game live while fundraising for the Trevor Project. Like, I've seen Ephrom get more verbose than this, both in his commentary videos and the articles he linked to this one. So if Ephrom really wanted to take a neutral stance, he's had several months worth of material in preparation to write one by his own words.
Of course, people like Nezzie have contributed to the narrative around cancel culture that has caused many to become scared of criticizing Rowling or boycotting her work, but that's neither here nor there.
Actually, that is here and there. Cutting to the chase, fear was never cited as a factor in Nezzie's more recent thread. The closest we got was, "I'm sorry, but I love Harry Potter and need to play it," which doesn't imply the person was scared of speaking negatively. It implies Hogleg was too enticing for them, so they abandoned the boycott in order to buy the game. And that's forgetting how the other thread Ephrom just alluded to was from 2 years prior. There's no indication this tweet was about Hagrid's Hamhock Simulator 2023, and Ephrom doesn't necessarily show if the cancel culture of present day has the same stigma it held in yesteryear. Heck, Nezzie themselves doesn't do that when comparing these tweets, because the one from 2020 clarified they personally could not handle the shouting match that would ensue, and that it was written during a spike in anxiety! You can't take an outlier in someone's behavior and frame it as the norm for the internet in general. Please, for the love of all that is baked and frosted, stop stretching these anecdotes for a point!
Yeah, that's the thing that really gets here. If anybody reading this is wondering why it's so hard to get people to engage in an organized boycott in support of transgender rights, it's because society as a whole, including many of the same people now calling for a boycott, have spent the past several years shoving the narrative that boycotts and criticizing a celebrity is cancel culture down our throat.
That's what it is by definition, my guy. Cancel culture refers to ostracizing, boycotting, or shunning someone over unacceptable behavior, which fits the protests against Rowling to a T. You mean to tell me everyone has been calling a spade this whole time? Oh, say it ain't so.
People are now scared of doing either of those things, because they're worried about coming off as cancelers since, oddly, those people tend to be the most hated of all.
People. As in a single person that no one name drops. Vessel, please. Are you starting to see why one mouse is not enough to bounce off of? I'm no doctor, but I'm sure human trampolines are bad for your health. Unless you have more trampolines. Then they're bad for everybody.
It's the end result of the same coward culture I warned a year and a half ago this treating cancel culture as some kind of almighty evil would lead us to.
Alright, this has been stewing in my brain's back burner for a moment, but for some reason Ephrom can't describe why cancel culture is painted as evil. The closest he gave were those who are quick to call others transphobic, but he also neglects why the problem exists and how it got there. Should I add my 2 cents, it boils down to a number of factors, but put simply, these people are their own brand of crazy. For some reason, many Twitter users lack the elusive magic item known as nuance. Especially when arguing with other people. Pair that with an impulsive or reactive mindset, and 2 shots of dickishness. And the end result will give birth to a meme such as this. Twitter is the only place wherein sentences most articulate still get misinterpreted. Thou may hearken, I liketh pancakes, and one yonder shall proclaim, So thou hateth waffles? Nay, peon, 'tis a whole new sentence. What on earth dost thou speak of? Now take that funny exchange, swap waffles with trans rights, and you have the hogleg discourse in a nutshell. Often the more standout members that cancel culture is infamous for are quick to attack others who don't agree with the cancelers. While it could arguably be easier to ignore or deal with a few individuals, depending on the circumstances, the same cannot be said when harassment is sent out in droves. At some point you need to question whether you're going too far. Heck, other boycotters in this drama were made aware that a portion of its population have escalated to death threats, having to call out this rogue fraction for their bullying and reminding everyone that breaking terms of service should never be a line to cross. I get the stigma surrounding cancel culture, but it's a case-by-case basis for how these protests pan out, thanks to the individuals that either remain civil or stray from the primary objective. And you really can't paint the entire practice as completely evil when other instances have broken the mold. Case in point, #OpenD&D. A boycott against Wizards of the Coast that is widely acclaimed, did not overstep its boundaries with harassment, and reach its end goal all within January. I'd teach you how to read an alignment chart, but this video alone classifies as a scheduling conflict.
In fact, it was such coward culture that caused Rowling to be allowed to say all the transphobic nonsense she's been saying for years without any hit to her reputation. To put it another way, this is the anti-cancel culture chickens coming home to roost. I hope everybody enjoys what they reaped.
Well, that doesn't sound defeatist or anything. No, sir. Glad you clarified for me, though. I did not want to eat another dictionary to comprehend these buzzwords. Especially not after the incident. Right, coward culture. That thing you totally proved exists. Sure. I've been over how Nezzie's tweets have little to do with cancel culture and cannot be used to generalize the majority of participants, but this mention of coward culture is its own can of worms. You paraphrase it as the anti-cancel culture chickens coming home to roost, but chickens are dumb! I eat the flightless birds! Seriously though, much like how boycotters can hit a brick wall, consumers of anti-cancel culture are in for an identical uphill battle. The most either side can really do when pitted against one another is to start a shouting match or legitimately discuss and argue with each other. One is counterproductive, and the other will most likely end in a stalemate. We need to remember, any protest can have a huge number of contributors, and in order to truly quell the masses, you'd have to convince them, all of them, that what they're fighting for is not worth it. And even then, just because you understand one side and its endeavors, does not mean you will agree with them or switch sides because of that. There's herding cats, and then there's Twitter drama. After a while, you should be able to tell when someone is never going to listen, and it would be much healthier to step away from the flame war and move on to someone else who you haven't told. Like, imagine if you were a door-to-door salesman. You would be wasting your time and effort trying to haggle with neighbors who vehemently do not want to buy your cookies when my house is 2 blocks over and severely lacking in Thin Mints. Come on, it's been like 5 minutes. I don't want to file a noise complaint. Now that this read-along is over, the time has come for my final thoughts. At least, that's what I would have said had there not been more to this story. I do want to reiterate that this article was personally removed and most likely disowned, but I didn't get into why it was removed, or the events that led to its removal. So as I was double checking my script for this commentary while I was in a Discord call with friends, I asked Nezziemonster about some points in the article because I wanted their insight, them being the only example used from Twitter and all that. At this point they were aware I was making this video, but haven't looked into the article for themselves since they were busy with other work. But as I recall the situation, they were pissed. I sent Nezzie the Medium link to read on their own, and they responded to Ephrom with a call-out post on their twitter.com. Afterwards, they and Ephrom had a private conversation about his article. Now I don't have the discussion, nor is it my place to pry into someone's personal DMs without their permission, but Ephrom did take down the Medium post at Nezzie's request. So, remember when I mentioned Ephrom's activity on Medium is far more obscure compared to his Twitter? And how I implied said obscurity could have been on purpose? Well, this kind of affirmed my suspicions. My eagle-eyed viewers out there may have already figured this out, but Ephrom's article was posted January 18th. The thread he built this article on top of was from January 17th. With the way he described cancel culture and the discourse surrounding Hogwarts Legacy, it doesn't seem like Ephrom wanted to deal with the boycotters despite him trying to argue against those masses. And the speed at which he posted these paragraphs? I don't want to say he was trying to talk shit without getting hit, but there is enough cynicism directed at Nezzie's words to insinuate that rashness was at least a factor during the writing process. In any case, the time frame between the thread and the article heavily implies this was not thought through enough if what we have here was the end result. Now, there's some pros and cons to how soon you unveil your written word. Trust me, I still have commentaries from years back that I still want to get out there eventually. While I've bided my time on projects like these, itching to throw in my 2 cents, it's when events unfold in real time that patience truly is a virtue. I was willing to be lenient about this whole article, Ephrom. I am not holding back on this!
This Hogwarts Legacy thing marks the 3rd time I think where I was right for a very long time before that point. Everybody either ignored me or mocked me, and when it was undeniable that I was correct nobody gave me so much as an apology.
Dare I ask, right about what?
I correctly predicted that declaring criticism of the political views of a creator, cancel culture, would lead to a situation where boycotts on the basis of political views are always seen as such regardless of context. And therefore given our culture has made cancel culture the most demonized thing in all of existence, boycotts would become impossible. Read what I wrote in response to the Scott Cawthon and John Cena controversies if you want more information on how model I've developed looks.
Ugh. Let's get this out of the way. Boycotts in of themselves are a method used in cancel culture. Whether or not politics are thrown into the mix does nothing to change that, and it's not just a reason, it's a justification. No protest would go anywhere without a worthy cause to rally behind, and that purpose holds the same importance as the actions taken under that banner. Boycotting Hogleg did not become impossible because of cancel culture or political views. People were forced to pick a side after Rowling branded the profits made with her IP as a statement, and it grew increasingly difficult because the opposing side is a large and obstinate majority, while bad actors on the boycott's end poison the public image of the minority. But that's just the logistics side we're talking about. I haven't even touched the morality of this pseudo-intellectual hogwash. In the face of this boycott and its outrages, with VTubers incriminated for either being unaware of changes in Twitch's automatic moderation, or responding in rancorous apathy over the hurtful image playing Hogwarts Legacy presented them as, instead of rectifying the situation with a straightforward apology, or at the very least, tweaking one switch in those automod settings. With a wildfire of anger spread across the internet at large, you chose to grandstand about how you were correct. About what? How annoying these boycotters can be? How cancel culture will always have this negative public image? Did removing your article on the drama mean nothing to you after being called out and criticized for it even in this recent thread? Now here's a status update for you. A user named Tuyun memed on Ephrom with a quote tweet basically telling him to shut up, to which Ephrom was quick to label it as possible cancel culture. Let me repeat that. Ephrom was heavily against the boycotters throwing around the word transphobe so haphazardly, yet would assume this solitary BTS equivalent of the cease crab was meant to beat his ass in the quote tweets. This is where the gloves come off, as Yoon laments how he has discussed this behavior with Ephrom several times before, how Ephrom neglects to imagine scenarios that would disprove his claim, how he is so dead set on obtaining some kind of victory, and used minorities as stepping stones in order to kickstart discussions. Ephrom's response? Deflect. deflect from how every instance he alluded to still springboarded off of marginalized groups, deflect from apologizing when it's his actions that landed him in hot water, both current and prior, deflect from the pain others endured by grandstanding about his troubles, what he had to go through. Because as we all know, one man's trudging through multiple controversies is on par with the hundreds of thousands discriminated against in the LGBT, or the millions living in Taiwan that fear being invaded by China. Those groups can't exactly turn off the monitor and act like nothing happened, Ephrom. You chose to crawl through those sewers, while these people live through it whether they want to or not. But don't worry, it gets worse. So after Yoon blocked Ephrom after he missed the forest for the trees not once, but 3 times, Ephrom wanted a 4th go-around as the living nerd emoji, reaching for any assumption and implication he could argue against instead of the words directly written in front of his face. Bite your tongue and swallow your damn pride, Ephrom. No one cared if you were right because you were not in the right. You spoke on the matter because you wanted to be correct, not because of an issue that needed correction. If you did, then you would have advised something, anything, to at least mitigate the problem instead of labeling the end goal as impossible. This essay you've erased, on top of your recent thread paraphrasing it, just goes to show that attention was at the forefront of your mind, not the people you speak to. I don't normally involve myself with flame wars. This armor only works on physical conflict, and personally speaking, finding the right words is a lengthy process. Even now I wonder if I was too harsh in places, or that I surely screwed up somewhere along the line. Bit late for that now, isn't it? Subjects like these are bound to draw someone's ire. The least you can do is find an eraser, not a larger brush. You should be aware of how much weight is carried by your words and handle your penmanship both seriously and delicately as the topic you write of. Ignore for a short reprieve that you've apparently gone through this song and dance before, set aside how you threw my friends under the bus. My bias, my resentment, has not and should not hinder the research and critical thinking needed to argue my stance. Double-checking your situation, triple-checking your tone, quadruple-checking your words for any inaccuracies or misinformation. Just anything to prevent coming in hot with a twisted narrative that betrays your initial intent. Those should be priorities 1, 2, and 3. I believe informative content like this should suggest better solutions to the dilemma they focus on. Otherwise, how else will anything change for the better? If I may recommend other videos on this Wizarding World discourse, I'd point you in the direction of James Somerton, my pal Doodletones, and Nezziemonster once he gets that video finished. I want to send you off to people who I think are more knowledgeable on the subject, should my commentary be lacking. Theirs will at least have a wider scope than my hounding on one guy for his hot takes. The links should be in the description and info card for your convenience. I, for one, will do my part, however minuscule a contribution it is on its own. I'll still encourage everyone to do the same. And with that, I take my leave. This has been Zenith Swordsman, returning to post.